Hello, bonjour, and welcome. My name is Tamir Maharaj, Trade Advisor here at World Trade Center, Winnipeg. I'd like to begin today's webinar with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the lands of Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Innu, Denisoline, and Dakota Oyate nations. We acknowledge that we are also on the homelands of the Red River Métis and that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are on the ancestral lands of the Inuit. The World Trade Center Winnipeg team respects the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledges the harms and mistakes of the past and present throughout our nation. Thank you for joining our webinar, The Impact of Culture on Businesses in International Markets, India, which will be presented by Marvin Hough, President of MIRA. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. Please send all your webinar questions directly to the chat box at the top of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many as we can during the session as well as in the Q&A session at the end. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box as well, and I'll answer your question as soon as possible. You'll all receive a PDF copy and a recording of this presentation within the next week too. Now it's time to start our webinar. I'd like to introduce you to Marvin Hough. Marvin draws on 30 years of experience with Export Development Canada, Canada's official export credit agency, having served in multiple locations around the world via Marvin Hough International Research and Analysis Ltd. Marvin provides international research and analysis services to Canadian companies, educational institutions, and government departments, focused on key strategic markets, including India, China, and Mexico. Welcome, Marvin. The floor is all yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to do another session with WTC in Winnipeg. And it's very perceptive of you to have this session on India as things warm up in Canada-India relations. As probably everyone knows, there's some significant good developments there. I'm going to talk about the impact of culture from my experience, from also observing and helping various Canadian companies set up in India, do business in India, expand in India. So to start with, I will just briefly review my background. The main point, I guess, would be my experience with EDC. I had a long career with EDC. Most of you will know Export Development Canada. And I was fortunate to serve in New Delhi for 4 years, covering a number of key sectors for Canada, including oil and gas, mining, and energy. And that experience in India gave me an opportunity to travel throughout the country and see some of the projects that Canada was doing, which were very exciting, including hydroelectric projects in Himachal Pradesh and in Kerala in the south. And it was really an unforgettable experience. The biggest impression I got was just how diverse India is, and we're going to be talking about culture. So you can already have a takeaway that Indian business culture is extremely diverse, and one where you can't make too quick of a judgment about what's going to happen in one state or another. Since I've had my career in EDC, I've been doing some teaching, but I continue to follow India through various platforms. I've been on the Canada-India Business Council. The Canada-India Business Council is a group of largely the bigger Canadian companies focused on India. And I'm currently on the advisory board of the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, which should be probably known to a number of players in Manitoba. And I continue to find this market to be extremely interesting and evolving. There's so many things we'll talk about how that impacts culture. But India, from my point of view, after serving in different countries and being observing through EDC activity in big markets, I would say India has always been for Canada the country with the biggest potential, but the most unrealized potential. And hopefully, with things warming up and with opportunities ballooning in India, we'll see more action and move that trade performance forward. So what I thought I would do is do a quick overview of India from a market point of view and the sectors. And as we were talking, Melanie, many of the sectors are represented in Manitoba as well, the key sectors of opportunity. So we can go into questions about the sectors. Then move into the Indian business culture and examples of how it impacts business. And I can tell you that I've seen companies totally stymied by the lack of understanding of what's happening, not being able to get meetings and wondering why, kind of thing. Companies who've adapted very well, companies who, even big companies internationally, like KFC, who had a terrible experience trying to get into the market and having to revamp their whole approach. And we'll talk a little bit about the changes in Indian business culture and the traditional stereotype Indian culture that some of you are familiar with and how it's changing. And then what I call the ABCs for success in India. I put them in alphabetical order of things that you've got to be mindful of if you're seriously looking at doing business in India, and the sources of support, including World Trade Centers, of course. So what we may want to do is have some questions after I finish the overall market overview. Just generally, India is a huge country, a third of the Canadian geographic size and about 35 times the population. So, the world's largest youth population. And you'll hear comments always about the demographic dividend in India, the young people coming forward and what that could mean for driving India forward. And the challenges we'll talk about as well. India accounts for only 2.4% of the world's surface, but close to 18% of the world's population. So look out. 28 states and 8 union territories. Prime Minister Modi has been in power now for over 10 years. And, some remarkable change, and certainly some of the 7% growth rate can be directly attributed to policies of the Modi government. He was the chief minister of Gujarat, which is a very progressive state. And there are opportunities throughout the country, but you'll see that the business environment will be different depending on the political orientation. And I'll get into that a little bit. The languages, English is in business is widely spoken, but the other official languages and local languages, Hindi, of course, having a representative who can navigate in local languages is always important in a business culture. And the GDP per capita, well, India is growing remarkably. look at that level of per capita. So a long way to go, and some big issues on the horizon. And I put these three as the overriding issues from a very high level point of view. The challenges for India, the inequality is certainly one where if you look at India's richest 1%, they own about 53% of the wealth in the country, comparable to in the US about 37%. And raising that income level from the agricultural rural areas and reforming minimum wages will be highly important going forward, as everyone has to share in the success and the growth. But that issue is in front of you big time throughout India. The second big issue is the low female workforce participation. Women contribute only about 17% of the GDP, and they've got a long way to go in that regard. There are some good initiatives, but it takes time to filter that through the economy. Some states are better than others in that. And the big question relating to the demographic dividend is the skill development. And 15 million youngsters entering the workforce each year. More than 3/4 are not really job ready, so they require some training even to get into the workforce in most cases. So there's a big gap there, and that's an area where Canada, can play a huge role. I was doing a consulting project for Algonquin College here in Ottawa, and we compared their offerings to the Indian National Skill Development Corporation's key skill sets that they needed to develop. And I think there was 22 key skills and trades for everything from welding to interior decorating to nursing. And Algonquin College had programs for something like 18 or 19 of them, So and that's just an example of one college. So Canada can be a major player in helping that skilling up that India needs so badly. On the positive side, and we'll talk more about this, but the key point of the Indian government's initiatives has been to promote and put forward the mechanisms for a digital economy. And that has resulted in these three sort of main initiatives. One is the financial inclusion of non-banked individuals being able to receive funds through online applications. The universal digital identity for everyone in the country, which makes it very much efficient for the government to be able to send checks and money to these individuals, and the smartphone and internet connectivity. So India, with the 850 million internet users, is a connected economy. And sometimes you think, wow, there's so many people who are in that low end of the economic sphere. But, this is the positives about India, very much moving towards a digital economy, which will make inclusion for the low income much easier. There have been Canadian educational players who've been in India to help as well with online education in the rural areas. So that's a huge aspect which Canada should be mindful of going forward. So if we look at this from the point of view of Canadian companies, and you're just trying to size up India in terms of positives. Lots of things that you would know very well. English language is widely spoken. The growth rate very much in the 6 to 7% range. The common law system makes trade much easier when people can understand the legal aspects. A strong private sector, and that includes the so-called Indian conglomerates, who are huge companies with multitude of sectors like Tata, Mahindra, Reliance, and they buy, all kinds of things from Canada, potentially, and have relationships with EDC as well, Export Development Canada, setting up lines of credit provided they buy from Canada. The banking sector is well developed, and I mentioned the digitalization. Investment is flowing in. There's a lot of Canadian pension funds going into India. Intellectual power and innovation is there. In places like Bangalore, it's really quite amazing. And the implementation of the GST in the past few years has made also trade across the country much more seamless. And global companies are in India having their impact on the environment and even the business culture. So lots of accelerators, and on the other side of the scale, government to government relations, have been an impediment to growth in the past few years, and it's been an on and off kind of thing over the years. But definitely there's the level of engagement when you consider not just the federal government, but provincial governments and their activities in India. There's lots of, as I was saying earlier, once the engine starts to start up again, there's lots of components of that relationship from the government and also into the private sector collaboration. India has some huge local groups like the FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce, and the Confederation of Indian Industry. So it's not just government to government relations that will matter. Some of the other issues that have to be considered: inadequate or inconsistent infrastructure. When I was there on the ground, that was always a question mark of whether you'd have the power to consistently to run your factory. Water sometimes was an issue, but there have been improvements, and it's a checkered kind of case right now, where some states have very, very solid and state-of-the-art infrastructure, and others do not. Diversity, I already mentioned, there's no single Indian market, and you got to plan accordingly. It's always a challenge when Canadian companies are thinking about getting an agent or a representative, as many of them are, really engaged in their local city or state, but do not have relationships or understanding of other states. So it's not a market where you can go national if you've got a good product without a lot of work cultivating players in other regions of the country, other states, and other cities. One thing about India that Canadian companies will learn very quickly is that they're very price conscious, and they, as they say, they build their chops from early days. They have negotiated for many years just in normal life, from being at the market to buying homes or whatever. So when you get into negotiation, you'll find that the price sensitivity is always very important. Another challenge for us is the distance to the market and the costs. And over the years, I've had many companies say to me that, they can't afford to go 3 times to India in a year. And they may need to be in India 3 times a year, so things are not working out. So you've got to plan for it. Things are changing, of course, with digital, but still relationships are extremely important. Canadian companies in the market have a challenge of finding skilled labor. And skilled labor, they leverage what they've got and often are looking to have better employment packages. So you got to be mindful of your employee relations very much. Bureaucracy, of course, is there. And India has certainly made strides in combating some of the corruption. But needless to say, it's a huge country with so many different levels of government that you've got to be mindful of that and your ethical policies. Another point that I don't think is discussed enough is the lack of a Canadian ecosystem in India. And by that, I mean a system where Canadian companies share their information, Canadian companies that through the chambers and through their connections are helping others and working with government, working with EDC, and so that new players have places to consult. We need that in a market like India. It would be much stronger in markets like Mexico, where there's more Canadian companies, but we need that ecosystem built up. And other issues, of course, adapting to the market. The legal system is notoriously slow. So a lot of, Canadian or international companies got to be mindful of having arbitration clauses in other jurisdictions to get results if there is a legal issue. India, with all its promise, still is a market with tariffs, and of course they're fighting with the U.S. on tariffs right now. But the average tariff, if you just look at it from the point of view of all products going in, would be around 16%. If you weigh it for the actual trade, where you've got a lot of commodities on the lower end, it's about 5%. But Canadian companies have to be mindful and take into account tariffs as they go along in their pricing, which is, as I mentioned earlier, a very key thing that they're able to be competitive. And there's security and communal issues in certain parts of the country that flare up from time to time. One of the biggest problems, though, for our Canadian brand or Canadian point of view is just the fact, and this was the case when I was in India many years ago, there's just so few Indian companies who really know Canadian companies and Canadian products. And the knowledge barriers, continue to haunt us, and we're not always most effective in promoting. I know that certain other countries use their chambers of commerce much more than Canada does in bringing companies to the markets. But that's kind of an overview of the pluses and challenges for working in India. And our bilateral trade, it's quite modest by all accounts. Merchandise exports, which are dominated by pulp, paper, potash, pulses, lots of peas there, about 5.3 billion. And those are the products that we're top of the list when I was in India over 25 years ago. On the imports, we're importing a lot of pharmaceuticals, electronics, etc. And from the services side, of course, our numbers look better. And a lot of that is the education, with Indian international students being such a big part of international student recruitment here in Canada, 16.1 billion. But you know, I always go back to the merchandise exports. That 5.3 billion should be much higher than that, and of course, it doesn't include some products that get shipped to another country and then into India, like diamonds that go through Belgium and into you get processed and then into India, but still it's quite modest and should be higher. Now, these are the sectors that I think are the priorities, and the government, Canadian government, is promoting all of these. The information technology and digital area, where you know, Canadian firms in AI and machine learning, data analytics, fintech is coming on big. Have great opportunity in utilizing the STEM graduates in India, and more smaller companies are finding their way in there. Clean technology and renewable energy is also a very attractive area, with India putting priorities on areas like solar and hydro. And as you heard from the Minister Anand's recent visit, the LNG can be a real opportunity for Canada to really get some sizable shipments of LNG into the market. Agriculture and agri-food, as I was saying earlier, you know, that covers a huge ground. Lots of Manitoba companies in agri-tech, farm mechanization, food processing, and you know, that sector is ripe for taking advantage of. One of the things that I was always remarking on, and it's still the case, that the percentage of agri-food product in India that is perishable and is unused every year, you know, it's very significant. So Canada has potential to continue to help with the distribution, storage, refrigeration, all of that in India. Another sector is infrastructure expansion, logistics, and smart city development. This is another area which will kind of reinvigorate or reignite now with the relations, but tremendous opportunity for exchange and Canadian applications for smart city development, for example. And India is just craving to do that in their cities. Automotive and electric vehicles, the EV ecosystem opportunities for Canada in battery manufacture, EV components, etc. Pharmaceutical and healthcare, tremendous opportunities in medical devices, diagnostics, telehealth solutions, that you know, Canada is leading in some of these areas, but hasn't been as aggressive and proactive in reaching out to markets like India so far. And advanced manufacturing and semiconductors, lots of potential, and right into consumer markets, which you know, you got to really be having your act together if you're going to bring a consumer product into India, as to whether you can handle all of the logistics and understand the scope of what you're getting into. But those are tremendous opportunities for Canada. So maybe, Melanie, we could just check if anyone, before I go into the business culture, which is the thrust of what I'm going to talk about now. But does anyone have any comment or question or application of what I've said in Manitoba or Winnipeg?
We don't have any comments in the chat, but if someone has, or question, I should say, if someone has one, they can feel free to unmic and ask. Okay.
Always open. I'm always open to questions anyway, so we'll go forward.
Yeah.
What I've done here is just, Indian business culture is complex, but these would be what, in my view, the very key aspects of Indian culture that you should be thinking about as you start to do business. Number one is the collectivism, and the very fact that Indians are in one way or another a member of a group or a community, a religion, a family, and families are extremely important in India, as many of you know. So much of the life is revolving around the family, and so if you're negotiating with an Indian business person, or if you're hiring staff in India, you cannot afford to sort of dismiss the idea of that individual's family life. And one way or another, you should be recognizing it. You may be providing support to your employee to have time for a family event, buying a house, all of these things. There's a expectation that the employer will be mindful of that much more than there would be in Canada. And you need to play to that. You need to understand that family life is crucial for the Indian culture. The second point that is really a driver of business is the communication. And India is a market where indirect communication is what you're up against. For a Western company, you're going to find that you need to read between the lines. What is said may have multiple interpretations, and look at the context of what you're saying. And I can tell you from my experience that over the years, so many Canadian executives have been asking very definite questions. Can we achieve this step by a certain date? And they're not getting a direct answer. They're getting, we're going to be putting everything towards that. They're getting, it should be possible. You've got to build on your own messages and understand the reason for your counterparts' lack of clarity. And that's part of immersing yourself in Indian culture. But Indians are not inclined to say no. That's over and over again proven, and you'll see that in negotiation as well. But when you're looking for a clear answer, you've got to have built up trust, understand why you may not be getting a clear answer, and find a way to get an answer without that direct approach. And it can be quite a challenge. We'll talk more about that. Hierarchy is fully embedded in the Indian business culture. And I can tell you stories of Canadian companies going to India and doing presentations and having meetings at the lower management level, the higher management level, and getting some feedback and hoping that they're going to get a decision, and they just are not getting anywhere towards the final decision. And, hierarchy plays a big role. Often it is at the top level that the full decision will be made. And all of those lower levels are part of the process. But, you have to push forward and find ways. And, I've had companies tell me that after going through a process of weeks and months of meetings, they finally got invited to an event and met the CEO, who offered them their cell phone number if there was any issue. And that cell phone number turned out to be the real pivotal point in getting the deal. In that, the Canadian executive did call, said that he had a challenge, and the CEO on the Indian side, met him, and they resolved that issue. A deal was struck. Now, could he have done that earlier? Maybe, and maybe not. But, it does make the case that you've got to be mindful of who's ultimately going to make the decision, and how can you position yourself best. And that may be through introductions from the Canadian High Commission, for example, and sometimes make a difference in getting you in to see the right level to get the decision. Relationships, I've had Canadian companies who told me that it took 9 months to build a relationship with their on-the-ground project manager, so that they could, the trust was there and the answers were clear, and the performance of the Indian company was up to par. So it takes building those relationships, and the trust is big time. You'll find the Indian, approach is to be very friendly and to invite you to things. All of that is fine, but they're not really trusting you yet either. The trust comes from exchange, from action on both sides, and then finally you can count on it. Religion, it's quite amazing how many different festivals are in place throughout the country. And, you got to be mindful of this. There's not one calendar. You've got to consult regionally and locally. And the variation we'll talk about right away in terms of the regions. So just keep those in mind, because we'll come back to how that impacts business. In terms of regional differences, language, in the multilingual landscape, adapting is essential, but southern regions is predominantly English or state-specific languages like Tamil and Telugu. Marketing messages, negotiations, and even relationship building must be tailored to the dominant local language. So often the Canadian will do the main business exchange in English, but behind the scenes there may be your agent is addressing some of the finer points in the local language. Relationship versus process driven. In the West and Northern India, personal relationships and trust building is what a deal really depends on. In some other areas, not as much in the southern and some urban areas. As you would imagine, there's big regional consumer preferences and differences in taste. In Gujarat, is more of a vegetarian state with not heavy on the spices. West Bengal, you've got sort of a fish and rice mentality, and all of the products are sorted in those lines. So you've got regional consumer preferences, but I must say, like, it's not just consumer preferences, it's business environment. Going back to Gujarat and West Bengal, West Bengal is a socialist philosophy in the government, and even some of the major Indian companies who set up there found it very difficult to run their factories and then move back to Gujarat, which is much more of a business-oriented state. So needless to say, you've got to be very careful in knowing what the business environment is locally. And there's a big urban and rural wealth dichotomy as well, which influences consumer priorities and openness to products. So the only way to really get a hold on things is to have local representatives that you can count on. And that's why I say it's unusual for a Canadian company just to have one collaborator or agent to cover the full market. That there are agent houses, which are having local relationship players, but often Canadian companies need to have an agent for one state or another. This may help in just setting the cultural orientation and some of the things that you might see in negotiation, for example. On our side of the ledger, the Canadian expectation is more for clear and exact timelines, more focused on the task at hand and step-by-step approach, sequential talking, achieve status kind of thing, and lots of consultation and teamwork. On the Indian side, you're going to run into scenarios where the time is more soft and elastic, not as orderly in terms of agenda items, distractions, interruptions, overlap talk. Many cases, it's more of a scribe status, so someone was born into the role kind of thing, and more clear authority figures at the top end, direction and relationships. So you can sort of see from the orientation that there will be challenges in things like doing negotiation. Now, how the Indian business culture is changing, I'll just touch on. Certainly modernization of workplace culture is there. There's a trend towards flatter hierarchies and more open communication. There's still a lot of importance to the relationships and indirect communications, regional and sectoral diversity, and expansion of the gig economy. So Indians love to do freelance and also a lot of entrepreneurial work, and this trend is reshaping some of the traditional employment models. So you'll find if you're employing people in India, there's a shift towards flexibility and contractual hiring, rise of technology and digitalization, evolving workforce expectations. So it's not as easy to retain employees in that environment. And you've got to be mindful that those who are skilled, they may have options. So they're looking for, benefits and better working conditions. So it's a challenge sometimes if you got a great employee are you going to be able to retain him? And as I mentioned before, there's an increasing global influence. All of the, the top 500 companies are in one way or another connected to India now, so they're having their influence as well. If you work with teams in India, you really, I guess the biggest message is you need to take the time to understand the personal and the human elements. And, there's a lot to that, but you really got to work with understanding the cultural nuances, and you'll find the communication that I mentioned sometimes is not clear. There may be instances, and there's a Canadian company I'm thinking about here, took about 2 years to get their manufacturing plant to the level of quality control that they were hoping for. And the CEO said it was all about HR. They just had to have the right people, the right mindset, doing the right thing and communicating back in order to make it go. And it didn't happen for 2 years. And recruitment is not always straightforward. So I'm looking at the time we've got. I'm just going to highlight here, Melanie, some of the things that maybe I haven't mentioned as much. You're really in India, the communication is always extremely important. And one thing is you don't rely on just one mode of communication. WhatsApp, email, and Indians really like personal phone calls still. You've got to connect with people and sort of understand what works for them. Durability of products is another good point. Any product that's going to be used in India needs to be durable. Example here is Nokia and their made for India phone, which was sturdy, waterproof, rubber coated, stain resistant, ideal for the farmers and truck drivers. And so there are products like that that are specially designed. In terms of entertaining, you're going to be invited and receive great hospitality. I always enjoyed, the lunches and the dinners, you need to take advantage of those and build your relationship from them and return the invitations. I think, I've mentioned about the human resources. The legal and compliance awareness, it is as I've sort of alluded to before, with the customs requirements, the legal and compliance awareness is extremely important. Sometimes you do need that on the ground confirmation of what the policy means, and somebody who can help stick handle getting through customs. You need a local legal representative to give you good advice on entry modes, etc. The other thing I would highlight would be management and team readiness. You've got to understand that it's not going to work just to have one person in your operation take over and handle all of the Indian cultural interface. So maybe your CEO has to be visiting the market. It's very likely. And he's got to be willing to do that. But the team has to be, anyone who touches business in the market should be aware of the business culture. And also from the point of view of market research and support, the good news is about India, with all of its complexity and diversity, there are many more channels of information now, both on the Indian government websites but there's new international market research companies, and I've listed some on my end slides that can draw on surveys and AI applications to present very good, product and sector reports, much better than a few years ago. So that's the good news, is if you can find the right people who give you the information, and there's lots of Canadian government support players as well, including EDC, but it is better than ever before. Okay, and pricing I can't stress too much, but it's always there as a point. There will be almost like the first or second question will be, can you give me a discount of 20%? You may have to, adapt your products, as American Tourister, for example, did. Relationships we've talked about. Risk management strategy. I go back to my home base of EDC, and you're going to face all kinds of risks, from credit risks to political risks to security risks to reputational risks are there as well, and you need good advice both from the legal side and from the credit side. One of my colleagues from the Canada-India Business Council, who operated in India for 20 years without having to make any compromises, if I can put it that way, said that it was well worth it not to compromise, because even if he was accused of corruption in the market, that would have damaged his reputation. So sometimes it takes, and his advice is, make sure the Indian buyers understand your ethical policies and practices upfront. Time management status is always there, and it's always amazing how much influence movie stars or football players and other cricket players can have in a market, but it's big time in India. So just concluding, and I can leave this with you, Melanie, in terms of sources of info. I've put on here some of the government sources on both sides, some of the private sector sources, and I've added, as I mentioned, those platforms for international market research using the latest digital and AI applications. And a small plug for my own book, which is available to you and includes a section on India. This is a book that I wrote outlining the business environments in different countries, the cultural characteristics, and a few practical case scenarios for each country, and the tactics and strategies. So it was kind of fun to do that, and it's available if anyone has an interest in that. And that's my coordinates. And needless to say, anybody who didn't attend, Melanie, that registered, can feel free to contact me. So thank you very much. I think I'm through on time, but I'm happy for any questions.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, drop them in the chat and I'll read them out, or you can unmute and ask.
Or if you have questions from the WTC, that's fine too.
Yeah, I guess I'll start it off with, are there any common cross-cultural communication issues that you see with Canadian businesses working with Indian companies that Manitoba businesses should keep in mind, or how can they best prepare to mitigate these issues?
Yeah, for sure. I guess the big ones are what I outlined there about the lack of clarity from the Indian side in a, indirect or high context culture. And going back to this Canadian company that set up a manufacturing plant, the Canadian company won a contract with Tata Motors to provide the chassis for one of their latest automobiles. And they won the contract, but quickly realized they had to set up in the Indian market. And as I mentioned in the earlier, they thought with their Indo-Canadian connections on this end, and they had people on their payroll who were from India, that it should be feasible to set that facility up and get the kind of precision quality control. But the communications, so they hired and they worked back and forth with weekly conference calls, but it never got to the full level of operation and consistency that they were looking for, and it was because of communication. It's built into the Indian players in that case that they didn't want to stick their neck out, so they were not being clear. They were not having their employees take some of these directions with the full authority, and as a result, the production was not where they wanted it. But it stemmed from that lack of clarity, and sometimes that's hard to identify when you've got somebody who's very, amiable, a good discussion going on, but it's just not clear from a business point of view.
And we have another question in the chat here. What is the biggest mistake you've seen SMEs make when trying to expand into India? What was the cost of that mistake?
Yeah, I would say the biggest mistake is not to have spent more time with their identifying and building a great local representative. And sometimes, a Canadian company would go over, they would ask for references for potential agents or collaborators and make that decision too quickly and not have somebody who, had the full qualifications. And by that, I mean technical expertise, connections, of course, the customer interface and relationship building, all of that. And then as a result, they, were disillusioned. They didn't get the kind of activity, and they weren't as effective when they went over to the market because their local agent was not that effective in presenting them. So it's, in my mind, and I say this a lot, probably your biggest decision will be who represents you in India, for a SME.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Tamir.
Go for it.
You mentioned that women are not a large population of the workforce over there. So if I'm a Canadian company and I'm led by a woman, how is that interaction working? Because I'm assuming, based on the stats, that most of the decision makers are male over there. And how is that interaction?
Yeah, it's actually very good, and it's improved a lot over time. As I mentioned that so many Fortune 500 companies are now in India, and there's a lot of women in those companies. So it's had a evolving effect, and some of the women who are in decision-making roles are very effective in both the government. It's just in the mass level, you don't have that high level of participation, and some of that is skewed to the lower end, of course, and people are moving in from the rural areas, and those women are not going to have the maybe skill sets and confidence, but it is changing. And I would say there's no disadvantage of a Canadian SME led by a woman. And in fact, you know, I think they'll get a very, very good reception with a lot of respect in the companies that they would be most interested in engaging with. Yeah.
Good.
That's a great question, by the way.
Thanks. Samir?
So I think if there's no other questions, thank you everyone who joined this webinar. Thank you, Marvin, for the insightful presentation. I have also included a link to our events calendar and some of our upcoming events, so make sure to check those out. Thank you for your time, and we'll hopefully see you online again soon.